November 24, 1848, Brocket Hall, William Lamb, 2nd Viscount Melbourne, better known as Lord Melbourne, dies at his country home in Brocket Hall. The former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, the man who as head of government had ruled the gigantic British Empire in two different periods for a total of nearly 7 years, now faced death, which in the end equalize all human beings. Although the death of this man is particularly painful, because in fact Lord Melbourne had died years ago, almost 9 years earlier to be more specific, on February 10, 1840, when the woman he loved married another man. That woman was none other than the Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, Victoria. Lord Melbourne was already Prime Minister when the previous king, the uncle of Victoria, William IV, died, and the young woman, one of only 18 years of age, became monarch of the British Empire. Lord Melbourne was in charge of protecting the young and inexperienced Queen, of teaching her to perform her duties as head of state, and even served as private secretary, apart from Prime Minister. But his excessive implication caused Lord Melbourne to end up falling in love with the innocent and beautiful, but strong and willful, girl, who was young enough to be his daughter. The worst thing is that she also fell in love with him, but Lord Melbourne, with his older age and experience in life, knew that his love was virtually impossible, and that Victoria could cost her crown, and precipitate the country into a political crisis and constitutional. She was the queen of the most powerful country in the world, and he was a politician, although temporarily the most powerful politician in that same country. She was of royal blood, at a time when it was usual for members of the royalty alone were married to other members of the royalty, while he was only a viscount of the minor nobility, and there were many more reasons that could take advantage of the powerful enemies of Victoria to try to force her to abdicate. That is why Lord Melbourne, for a sense of duty and to protect the woman he loved, rejected Victoria's declaration of love, in Brocket Hall itself, breaking the hearts of both. That day when Lord Melbourne refused to accept the love that Victoria offered him, was really the day he began to agonize. His agony became acute when Victoria announced that she would marry another man, with a cousin of her, the German Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. The blow was very hard for Lord Melbourne, not only because she was going to marry another man, but because that meant that she had already forgotten him, because besides she seemed quite in love with her future husband. On the fateful day of marriage, Lord Melbourne had to make a great effort because, to make matters worse, the Dam Protocol dictated that he, as Prime Minister of the Kingdom, should play a relevant role in the ceremony, marching in front of the cortege of the bride to the altar, and he standing almost next to the bride and groom at the altar, holding a huge ceremonial sword held high. Lord Melbourne would have wished to fall seriously ill so as not to have to endure stoically the torture of seeing the woman who loved to marry another a few steps from him. Lord Melbourne endured the situation pretty well even after the wedding, when Victoria said goodbye affectionately him, before to go with her husband to enjoy the honeymoon. But afterward, when he reached the solitude of his home, Lord Melbourne collapsed. For many years he had the ill-healthful habit of sitting in a chair drinking alcohol every night until he fell asleep, and always dawned on the armchair, which barely used the bed in his bedroom. But that night he not only drank alcohol until he fell asleep in the armchair, persuade him to deviate from his path of self-destruction. The fact that Victoria gave birth to 6 children in those years only added bitterness to his martyrdom, reminding his that she had an active sex life with her husband. Finally, the body of Lord Melbourne could not take any more and suffered a stroke. Then his deteriorated health continued to wane until that day, November 24, 1848, Lord Melbourne was at the gates of the final outcome. Lying in his bed, his image was very sad for anyone who had known him in his best years. He had become a premature old man, who looked 20 or 30 years older than his age, that for the average age and the life expectancy of his time already it was by itself a relatively advanced age. In the past he had been a handsome and strong man, now was a pile of bones and hides, his skin wrinkled and his eyes sad and off. He had the appearance of an unburied corpse, a body destroyed by old age and disease. Inside he had already resigned himself, and although he could not help feeling scared like all human beings in facing death, on the other hand, he felt a certain relief to see the end of his suffering, a life full of disappointment and sadness. Because, although losing Victoria was the final blow and the most painful in the end, before that he had already suffered other terrible blows of life. His wife, the first woman he loved, was unfaithful and ended up abandoning him to go with his lover, none other than the famous poet Lord Byron. Then she broke with her lover and wrote a novel where she told all the details of her adventure, aggravating the public scandal that humiliated Lord Melbourne. Though he and his wife later reconciled, their marriage had been destroyed, and it was only a formal reconciliation, to try to repair the damage to their image, and for their son. That was another blow for him, because with his wife had a son and a daughter, but his daughter died just 24 hours after birth, and his son was born with a mental illness, which long after his time would be known as autism. In the end his wife died, and a few years later the son of both. With so many blows of fate, it was normal that Lord Melbourne at heart wanted to die and give up a life that had only given him pain. His physical suffering was very great, but the soul's suffering was much greater. Little by little he went into the final dream, began to feel that the darkness was invading him, that he stopped feeling the perceptions that his physical body transmitted to him, that the voices of those who were around his dying bed were fading, and that their silhouettes vanished, that their eyelids fell, and that an abnormal, overwhelming, thick darkness was spreading through their consciousness. But at the end of that darkness a light seemed to emerge, like at the end of a tunnel, a light to which it was approaching, while a sense of peace was invading him, and in that light diffuse silhouettes began to emerge, but in the bottom he felt he was familiar with familiar people. He wanted to reach that light and immerse himself in it. He wanted to approach those silhouettes and discover the people they belonged to. He wanted to find some comfort, some love. He wanted to find at last the love that had been so elusive in his life earthly. And that way Lord Melbourne fell into eternity, returning to be one with the whole, and going into the pages of history. And leaving behind the love that could never be, the love with Victoria.